Welcome, everyone, to the Ready for the Draft podcast. I am your host, Gregg Schutze. This is episode 14 of the 2023 podcast series, where we take a look at the draft-eligible prospects and get you ready for the NFL draft. And episode 14 is the second installment of the bowl preview series. That's right, episode 13, we took a look at the first 21 bowls. Now it's time to go ahead and take a look at the final 20 bowls of the 2022 college football season. And I'll tell you what, we had an exciting end to the UAB Miami of Ohio game there at the Bahamas Bowl, and Trey Shropshire, with 183 yards and a touchdown, really showing off that vertical presence there in that passing game for the Blazers. Troy taking down UTSA. Look, Zachary Franklin is going to be a receiver at the next level. He's going to be a day 3 pick, probably that 5th, 6th, 7th round range, but a guy that I think, even though he doesn't separate consistently and needs to get a little bit bigger to work his way through the jam, this is the guy who has tremendous catch radius, tremendous hands. I think he'll end up being a player there at the next level. But look, Troy, obviously you've got the heat-seeking missile that is Carlton Martial there at the linebacker position. 14 tackles in that game, the Cure Bowl. Troy getting the win over UTSA. Cincinnati going down to Louisville 24-7 in the Fenway Bowl. Always a good time to see a football game there at Fenway Park. And obviously Yaya Diaby, 1.5 sacks, showing off the speed, showing some power in his hands as well, coming off the edge. How about that Celebration Bowl where North Carolina Central took down Jackson State? Deion Sanders trying to get that signature undefeated season there for Jackson State. Unfortunately, North Carolina Central comes away with the win there in overtime. And, the guy that I was most impressed with was the MEAC Offensive Lineman of the Year, and that's Robert Mitchell. They're playing that right guard position. I thought this was the guy that was opening up a ton of holes for Latrell Collier, the running back, and Davius Richard, the quarterback, a guy who I think has an NFL future there up front. BYU coming away with a slim victory there over SMU in the New Mexico Bowl. That was an exciting game. Ben Bywater, only a sophomore, but he was the guy that really was a standout there. I thought Blake Freeland showcasing again why he's one of the top offensive tackles in this year's draft. Fresno State 29-6 taking down Washington State in the Jimmy Kimmel LA Bowl, and Jake Haener just proving once again that, look, this kid, he's a gamer, he's a tough dude, but he knows how to win, knows how to will his team to victory, and a guy that he knew where to go with the football. He was accurate, showed that arm strength, and 280 yards passing and 2 touchdowns to get the win for the Bulldogs. Southern Miss 38-24 winners in a Lending Tree Bowl over Rice. And I'll tell you what, Frank Gore Jr., only a sophomore, he'll be back again, and some unfinished business there for sure, but 329 yards and a couple of touchdowns, breaks Cameron Peoples' bowl record for rushing yards in a game. And Jason Brownlee, the receiver, showed off a little bit of range there with that receiving skills. A guy that I still think has a long way to go if he wants to make an NFL roster, but has a chance to potentially sneak his way onto a practice squad. Oregon State just demolishing Florida in the Vegas Bowl, 30-3. And in this game, look, you have to look at Jack Coletto, a guy that played fullback, playing linebacker, special teams, does a little bit of everything. This is a guy who's going to be on an NFL roster because he will do anything and everything that the team is going to ask him to do. I thought Joshua Gray, the left tackle, he got pushed around a little bit up front by Florida. That front really giving that left tackle a lot of problems. That makes you a little concerned for him. I think he has to come back to Corvallis for at least another year. I believe he's only a redshirt sophomore. Boise State, 35-32 winners over North Texas in the Frisco Bowl. That game was a little chippy. And I'll tell you, John Ojukwu, the left tackle, really trying to battle his way into that 3rd round consideration up front. I thought Taylon Green was really the star there for the Broncos. He's a young kid, but a guy who still needs to develop as a passer, but he's a tremendous athlete and makes plays with the football in his hands. KD Davis, wanted to see a little bit more out of him. I really thought that this bowl game could be a way to showcase his ability there. on a national stage, and a guy who just flies around, makes plays on the football, and we just didn't really see a ton of that in this game, which really is a disappointment for me, because I'm looking at Carlton Martial. I thought he really stepped up and played well. You think of a guy like Jatavis Brown coming out of Akron, goes to the Chargers, undersized linebacker, really showcasing his ability. KD Davis, 5'11", 229 pounds, a guy who has over 400 tackles, 31 and a half going for loss, 12 sacks in his career. He was missing gaps. He was taking improper angles. So, I think he's got a little bit of ways to go to really continue to develop his game. I still think he has an outside shot at making an NFL roster, because the kid's just a tough dude. Marshall, Myrtle Beach Bowl, 28-14 winners over UConn. And look, Kalen Laybourne and Rasheen Ali, the dynamic duo there at the running back position. Look, Kalen Laybourne, obviously he's going to have to answer to that the Florida State, dismissal. But this is a guy who is powerful between the tackles, and a guy who has a tremendous burst. He can run away from you, and you love the contact balance as well. Stephen Gilmore, the corner, look, only a couple of tackles on the day, but 3 pass breakups. Needs to watch himself. Can get a little bit of handsy at times. Will arrive a little early at the football. Not the biggest guy either at just 6'2", 169 pounds. So he's got the length, but he's a guy that could get pushed around by some of the bigger receivers. But look, ball skills for days. 9 interceptions, had 3 interceptions in each of the last 2 seasons, and 34 career pass breakups. This is a guy who's going to be playing on Sundays, and he just really gave Zion Turner trouble there for the Huskies. And Jackson Mitchell is the real deal there at the linebacker position for the Huskies. We can expect to see him come back for one more season, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what Jackson Mitchell can do there with Jim Mora Jr. and company. Eastern Michigan, 41-27 winners over San Jose State in the famous Idaho Potato Bowl. And really with Eastern Michigan, Samson Evans, the running back, a guy who just looks to continue to churn out yards. He's an interesting guy. A running back who is going to come back and play another year, but he'll be a guy that people want to keep an eye on. 6 foot, 218 pounds, a guy that could end up being potentially one of those fullback type players. But really, it was all about Jose Ramirez for me in this game. Watching his ability to bend coming off the edge, really gave San Jose State trouble. And this was really showcasing some defensive ends that we are going to be seeing playing at the NFL level. When you look at this guy, obviously 12 sacks, 19 and a half tackles for loss, really knows how to get after the quarterback. And I thought that you saw some power in his hands. You saw the ability to bend, turn the corner. He's going to be a wide 9 guy, probably a situational pass rusher early on, likely to be an outside linebacker at the next level. 6'2", 251 pounds. Man, playing with his hand in the dirt, but I think he's an explosive edge rusher. And then when you look at Viliami Fehoko, or Junior Fehoko, he's 6'4", 263 pounds. Another guy where you saw a ton of power in those hands. A guy that can bend really well. Look, he's very active too. 69 tackles this past season, 19 for loss, 9 sacks, 23 in his career to go along with 47 tackles for loss. 12 pass breakups as well, including 6 in his in 2021. A guy who, look, he could still come back for his 6th year, but a guy I think is really on the NFL radars. A guy that could end up sneaking his way into that 4th, 5th round consideration when it's all said and done. I thought Cade Hall, a guy who, with Fehoko, he was the Mountain West Defensive Player of the Year this past season. Cade Hall just a couple of years ago in the COVID shortened year where he had 10 sacks, had 7.5 to follow up this year. Violent hands, very strong at the point of attack, 6'3", 270 pounds. Just don't see the bend with him that you do with Fehoko. Not as disruptive coming off the edge. That's going to be a huge concern. And then the receiver position. Elijah Cooks is a dynamic receiver on the outside, a guy that, look, he wanted to be the guy, 6'4", 215 pounds, comes to the Spartans after playing at Nevada, struggled to really stay on the field. In 3 of his 5 seasons there with the Wolfpack, played in just 7 games. In the 2 seasons where he made an impact in 2018 and 2019, played in 24 games, and over 1,200 yards receiving in those 2 seasons. Went over 1,000 yards this past year, 15.6 yards per reception. So a guy that can be a downfield threat. He had a decent game there as well. 6 receptions, 93 yards. But again, Eastern Michigan coming away with a victory. Toledo 21-19 winners over Liberty. I'll tell you what, with Toledo, there are a couple of guys on defense that I'm a huge fan of. I talked about Jamal Hines. We saw some power to go along with the speed coming off the edge. Very dynamic player. Can bend, come off the edge, get to the quarterback in a hurry. He's a guy that I'm gonna continue to pound the table for. But a guy that I forgot about in the last episode, and it's Jarrell Johnson. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the fact that this guy is an absolute stud. The nation's leader in tackles for loss at 22, and in this game, the Boca Raton Bowl, 9 tackles, a sack, and racked up 5 tackles for loss. That's right, 5. And what you saw was a guy who was so physical at the point of attack, using those hands, just driving his man into the backfield. You watch him shed the blocks, stack, shed, and be able to chase down the ball carrier. A lot of times he was beating that right tackle to the inside, a jab step to the outside, get that inside move, and then once he got there, that burst, getting to the quarterback in a hurry, very disruptive. He's 6'3", 240 pounds, so he's a little bit of a lighter guy. Going to be one of those rush outside linebackers, but a guy that we have to be talking about on day 3 as a guy that I think can come in and make an impact at the next level. South Alabama, Western Kentucky, look, the Hilltoppers 44-23 winners, and Austin Reed going to come back for another season, went over just under 500 yards, 497 yards passing, 4 touchdowns on the day, but he'll be back. Armed Forces Bowl, Air Force taking down Baylor 30-15. Really, it was the Brad Roberts show. 37 carries, 116 yards, 2 touchdowns. This is a guy who I think has a chance to make an NFL roster if he so desires. We know that the bill coming out, helping Andre Carter potentially make it to the NFL, looking at a potential first-round pick. I think Brad Roberts has a chance to sneak his way onto an NFL roster. I really do, because of that physicality with the way that he runs. He has a nice burst. Not going to be a guy that's going to run away from you, but a guy that's going to get up, pick up yards in bunches. Houston taking on Louisiana down to the wire. Last second touchdown. Winners 23-16. And look, Tank Dell yet again. Come on, 6 receptions, 44 yards, couple of touchdowns. A guy that just doesn't seem to get a ton of respect, but a guy that is so explosive at that receiver position. I think he's going to be a day 2 pick when it's all said and done. And we didn't really talk about Tank Dell's stats in the last podcast, but when you look at what this guy has done, he's only been productive for the Cougs. Undersized, he's 5'10", just 155 pounds, but back-to-back seasons, over 1,300 yards through the air and 29 touchdowns in those years. 199 receptions during that time span as well. A guy that is going to be a favorite target for somebody at the next level. I think you can pretty much take that to the bank. Wake Forest taking on Missouri, Gasparilla Bowl, 27-17. A.T. Perry, once again, 11 receptions, 116 yards. He's a big target, a guy that's going to be able to get down the field. Was able to showcase that in this game. Missouri, you've got Chris Abrams-Drain. Watch this game, watch the secondary. That's really where Missouri's strength was, because so many guys up front ultimately went down to injury. Then Middle Tennessee taking down San Diego State, 25-23. Jalen Lane, only a sophomore, but he's a little guy, just 5'8", but 10 receptions, 111 yards, and a touchdown on the day. Really an exciting player with the ball in his hands. And then Teldrick Ross, a junior with exceptional ball skills, had a couple of pass breakups, a tackle for loss, and a fumble recovery in the win there for the Blue Raiders. So those are the games that we've seen to this point. Tomorrow is going to be the Quick Lane Bowl in Detroit. Bowling Green taking on New Mexico State. Really the star of that game should be Carl Brooks for Bowling Green, a guy to be on the lookout for as a mid-day 3 pick, a guy that can really get after the quarterback at 6'4" and 300 pounds. So as I mentioned, we got through the first 21 bowls in last podcast. We're going to go ahead and preview the remaining bowl games. And obviously the first game that we have to take a look at is that Military Bowl, UCF taking on Duke. And when the Golden Knights have the football, Really, you're going to see Isaiah Bowser, their physical presence there at that running back position. Just 3.9 yards per carry, so not a guy who's going to be overly explosive, but a power back. 760 yards on the year, 14 touchdowns. A guy, look, he played at Northwestern, transferred to UCF, and he'll be the guy to really keep an eye out for there when they're on offense. But defensively, Jason Johnson's going to be the guy, the inside linebacker, 119 tackles this past season as a junior. So he could be coming back. Likely, we would expect him to come back for one more year. A guy that just makes plays sideline to sideline, flies all the way around to the football. 6'2", just 200 pounds, so he's an undersized guy, but someone to keep an eye out for. They're just roaming the perimeter there for UCF. When you talk about Duke, obviously the quarterback, Riley Leonard, is going to get a lot of the attention. Only a sophomore. We'll be seeing him, talking about him next draft cycle, keeping an eye on his progress. When you talk about Duke and draft eligible prospects, we have to look at Shaka Hayward. 6'3", 220 pounds, a guy who I think is definitely explosive coming off the edge. I think he's instinctive, especially against the run. A guy that, he does get a little anxious at times, so over pursue plays, but a dude that can be disruptive with the speed coming downhill, good timing on his blitzes, range to the sideline, good speed laterally as well. The guy, 31.5 tackles for loss, 11.5 sacks, 337 tackles, including back-to-back seasons with 90-plus tackles. Shaka Hayward's going to be the guy to watch for when Duke is on defense. So next, we're going to go ahead and take a look at the Kansas-Arkansas matchup there in the Liberty Bowl. We know with Arkansas, their top draft-eligible prospect is going to be Drew Sanders. He is not going to be playing in the bowl game. He's a guy that's talked about as a potential first-round pick, and so obviously he's going to prepare for the draft, opting out. 103 tackles on the year, 13.5 for loss, 9.5 sacks, 5 pass breakups. A guy that shows that he can drop into coverage, has that range, and then a guy that can absolutely get after the quarterback. The speed, the relentlessness with which he plays. Also had 3 forced fumbles, to go along with those 5 pass breakups and an interception. So a guy that really knows what to do when he arrives at the football. Didn't really get a ton of time there at Alabama, so now he's really getting to play, his position and where he can really showcase his skills and his ability. He won't be the only one not playing in that game. Ricky Stromberg, the center, a guy who I think is going to be a top center in this year's draft. Top 5 center, 6'4", 310 pounds. He won't be playing in the game either, opted out for this game. Bumper Pool, the linebacker, 441 tackles in his career. A guy that, he missed having 4 straight seasons of 100 tackles or better by just 14 tackles. Really a tackling machine, a guy that flies around to the football. Injury really slowed his progress, and so he won't be playing in the game either. Really, when you're talking about Arkansas, you have to look at Raheem Sanders, Rocket Sanders, running back, 6'2", 227 pounds. Over 1,400 yards on the ground, 28 receptions as well. The explosive running back, he will be one of the top backs to be talked about in next year's draft cycle. KJ Jefferson, the talented quarterback there, 6'3", 235 pounds. The guy who's continuing to develop as a passer. Best completion percentage this past season at 68.3, 22 touchdowns, just 4 interceptions. Still more of an athlete playing the quarterback position. Needs to really shore things up there as a passer. And then Jaden Hazelwood, a guy that I didn't mention earlier as a guy that's likely to be sitting out. He declared himself eligible. The transfer from Oklahoma, played just 1 season there at Fayetteville. 6'3", 202, 59 catches, 702 yards, 3 touchdowns. Has a large catch radius, but a guy that I don't think can separate at the next level. He really has a long way to go. Would have loved to have seen him come back and play 1 more season, but he has declared himself eligible for the draft, so we won't be able to see that happen. When you talk about Kansas, obviously you've got the talented quarterback Jalen Daniels. He'll be coming back for another season. The injury, that really derailed Kansas's season. But look, Lance Leipold, this is a group of underdogs, and they're going to continue to claw and fight their way through. This is a guy just under 66% completion percentage, 13 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. 6.4 yards per carry on the ground, 404 yards total, 6 touchdowns as a guy running that football, just so dynamic in the open field. He'll be a guy to watch out for in 2023. So if we're talking about seniors, we're talking about Mason Fairchild, the tight end, 6'5", 261. When you think about this tight end class, one of the best that we've seen. Not only are we going to see guys come off on all 3 days of the draft, we're talking about pretty much all 7 rounds. And a guy that I think could potentially hear his name called is Mason Fairchild. No more as a blocking tight end, but when you think about it through the years from a guy like Richard Rodgers, not much of a pass catcher there at Cal, but really found a groove and really found what he can do there for the Green Bay Packers. O'Keefe there with Minnesota. Not much of a pass catcher, but was then ended up getting drafted there by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Mason Fairchild really had a breakout season. Has a knack for finding the voids in the defense, really good hands. A guy that not only is going to make those catches when the ball is right there in his frame, but has that large catch radius, can catch and extend for the football away from his frame as well. Really a nice catch radius. 29 catches for 363 yards and 5 touchdowns. But really the biggest thing is he's a blocker, an excellent blocking tight end. He's a name that not many people are talking about. Look, he's not the fastest guy. He's not the most overpowering guy, but it was one of those things to where every time you watch Kansas play, it always seemed that Mason Fairchild, number 89, was a standout. And so I think because of that, there's a good chance that Mason Fairchild could hear his name called late on day 3 in that draft. Then you're talking about number 14, Oregon, taking on North Carolina in the Holiday Bowl. We already know that Christian Gonzalez, the 6'2", 200-pound corner, only a redshirt sophomore, transfer from Colorado, but a guy that, look, he can be physical, has just really oily hips. He's very fluid as an athlete, can run stride for stride, can be physical when you need him to, very patient, excellent ball skills as well. He'll be a first rounder, has a really good chance to be the number 1 corner taken off the board. Obviously you also have Noah Sewell, also won't be playing in the game. Noah Sewell, 6'3", 251 pounds, the junior. I think he was destined to be a first round pick. This was a guy that I thought at the beginning of the season, trying to learn Dan Lanning's defense, he really struggled to kind of get things going. Once he started understanding where he needed to be, I thought he really elevated his play, showing his ability to play fast, play sideline to sideline. When he's allowed to just turn things loose and not really have to think about things, he can really excel. As a sophomore, look, 114 tackles, 8.5 going for loss, 4 sacks, just 56 tackles this past season, 5.5 for loss, 1.5 sacks. You're really wanting to see him elevate his game. But what I thought he really showcased was his ability to drop into coverage a little bit more. He's a guy that is going to be an interesting study. I think he's still going to end up being a first-round pick. He'll be battling it out with Drew Sanders to be that number 1 inside linebacker. To me, he's going to be a late 1, early 2 in that consideration, but again, he won't be playing in the bowl. So when we are talking about Oregon and guys that are going to be draft eligible that will be playing, Alex Forsythe, the center, 6'3", 303. This is a guy, look, he's a veteran center, and a guy that I think when he's in the game, he makes the Ducks offense that much better. A guy that really takes charge of that group up front, and a guy that, he's not the best athlete, but a guy who's just technically sound, does a really good job, winning with leverage at the point of attack. And then obviously you have the big guy, Malasala, Amave Laulu. He's 6'6", 315 pounds, and this is a guy, he can drop his anchor versus a bull rush, be stout at the point of attack, also very athletic and get out and pull, and you see just the athleticism out there. But this was the guy who was thrown down with one arm by Jalen Carter, a guy that was beaten badly off of a speed rush when they played Washington in that loss. Barely even got a hand on Jeremiah Martin, and ultimately got to the quarterback. Also struggled with Braylon Trice. Had that kick slide, initially looked good, and then he gets overextended. Trice ends up beating him, force an inside hold. So Laulu is a guy who I think should come back for another year, but there's a chance because there is some of this excitement about some of the traits that we could see him decide to enter the draft. Really would have loved to have seen Drake May taking on the likes of Noah Sewell and Christian Gonzalez, but we know that at the end of the day, Drake May is going to have a stellar game. Obviously there's this talk about him potentially transferring the NIL deals. Look, I think he's going to stay there as a Tar Heel. 6'4", 220 pounds, a guy, 373 total yards per game, very dynamic quarterback. He'll be a lot of fun to watch in this bowl game, going up against, a very tough Oregon front. Josh Downs will not be playing in the game, 5'10", 180 pounds. This is a guy that, I think he's quicker than he is fast. A guy that is so explosive, though, with his route running, understands how to set his man up, and is just so sudden in and out of his breaks. He'll be a guy that will excel at the next level because of his ability to get open. An open receiver is always the best receiver, right? But the guy that we have to be talking about in this bowl game is going to be Asim Richards, 6'4", 315 pounds. And look, with Asim Richards, what you have here is a guy who, there were reps against Myles Murphy where he was very light on his feet, showing excellent hands, his ability to hold up with excellent leverage, getting his hands under the pad level to stand up defensive ends, using his hands, driving Myles Murphy, clearing him out, washing him down the line, ultimately allowed Drake May a one-on-one versus Trenton Simpson. You love his ability to slide. You watched him against NC State. Drake Thomas, an explosive linebacker, was patient, waited for the spin move back to the inside, slides well to pick that up as well. So Asim Richards is a guy to me that you see the reps where he is dominating the man in front of him. You just want to see it on a consistent basis. I think he's going to be a guy that's going to end up getting drafted. He'll get to go up against the likes of Brandon Dorlus, DJ Johnson, guys who have a potential NFL future. And I think that'll be a nice test for him. Obviously, you have Bo Nix coming back for Oregon next season, and he's got a couple of guys that are joining him. His running back, Bucky Irving, his receiver, Tony Franklin. Those guys are both sophomores, so I think Oregon's going to be a scary team in the Pac-12 in 2023. Nix is going to get to go up against a very depleted secondary there for the Tar Heels, especially when you're talking about Storm Duck and Tony Grimes and Cameron Kelly all deciding to leave via the transfer portal. So it's going to be interesting to see just what Bo Nix can do. This may be a nice springboard into that 2023 season. Texas Tech taking on Mississippi, Texas Bowl, NRG Stadium. When you talk about Texas Tech, obviously you've got Tyree Wilson. Tyree Wilson is not going to be playing in this bowl game. This is a guy that's going to be getting ready for the draft, and it makes perfect sense. This is a dude who, 6'6", 275 pounds, an incredible wingspan, tremendous burst, a guy who plays with excellent effort as well. 61 tackles on the year, 14 going for loss, 7 sacks, a guy who I think has a chance to be a top 5 pick because of his ability to make plays. And look, he's a number 4 tackler on his team. When you think about that, as this defensive end, a guy that can get after the quarterback, he's also very active, a guy that's going to give you nonstop effort. You love being able to see that. And this is a guy, no offense to Myles Murphy, I think Tyree Wilson is going to end up being the number 1 defensive end in this draft. Not the most explosive. I think Myles Murphy gets him on the explosiveness, but the length, the power, and you do see some of that quickness from him. I think that's where he has a little bit more of those traits than Myles Murphy does. But unfortunately, we won't get to see him in this bowl game. One guy that you are going to get to see is SaRodorick Thompson. And what I like about SaRodorick Thompson is he's 6 foot, 215 pounds. Not the biggest guy by any means, but he's physical. He's physical at the point of attack. Drops that pad level, the contact balance, runs through contact. A guy that was just a leader there for the Red Raiders. 39 touchdowns in his career, 90 receptions as well. A guy that's battled some injuries, but he's not the most explosive guy by any means. But a guy that just knows how to make plays and get things done. And a guy that I think could find his way onto an NFL roster just because he's a guy that can do a lot of things right. and you love his ability, the vision, his ability to bounce the football outside and really just churn out extra yards. A guy that's going to wear out defenses, really more of a physical one cut and go type of runner with really good speed. I think Jalen Hutchings, the defensive tackle, look, he's only 6 foot, but 305 pounds. He's another guy that's going to be interesting on the interior of that line. I think Hutchings is a guy that can make plays up front, and without Tyree Wilson in the roster, on the roster for the game, he's a guy to really be on the lookout for as a guy up front to make plays. 18.5 tackles for loss, 7.5 sacks in his career. He's a guy that could end up making life miserable up front there for Ole Miss. You look at Tony Bradford, the defensive tackle as well. 25 tackles for loss, 11.5 sacks, including 5.5 this past season. Another guy who I think he wins with excellent hands. Really worked on Anton Harrison, the left tackle out of Oklahoma. Used his hands, shoving him back, especially forced Harrison's pad level to get a little bit too high, and was able to really drive him back and work him all the way to Dylan Gabriel. A guy that, look, he's 6'1", 300 pounds, so these guys aren't the biggest guys by any means, but guys who are explosive, can get up the field and make some plays. So I think that'll be an interesting matchup there for a guy like Nick Broeker. Now, Nick Broeker, to me, is one of the top 3 force guards in this draft. I think obviously you have Osiris Torrance, you've got Andrew Voorhees, you've got Jarrett Patterson, but I think Nick Broeker has to be right in that conversation because he is so technically sound. 6'5", 305, played left tackle. Ultimately now moves inside to the guard position where I think he's better off. And a guy who I think can struggle against some of the power at times, but the technique is really what you see here with this guy. Plays with excellent leverage, and doesn't, he keeps that pad level low. That's one of the things that you aren't going to see, is that pad level riding up. Will really do a great job anchoring in pass protection because of that. Keeps those legs driving in the running game. You see him on the skip pull, being able to get outside and get to the linebacker in a hurry. Blocking down on the defensive tackles, open up holes for both Zach Evans and Quinshon Judkins. That freshman running back is really going to be a force for Ole Miss. Jonathan Mingo, the 6'2", 225-pound receiver, he's only a junior, could come back for another season. When you watch Mingo play, the chemistry with Jackson Dart, I think took a little bit to get going at the beginning of the season, but look, 48 catches, over 800 yards, 16.8 yards per reception. To me, Jonathan Mingo is a guy that is I'd love to see him come back again for one more season. Ontario Drummond needed that extra season, didn't do so. I think that draft stock really was hurt by a poor combine performance. I really want to see Jonathan Mingo come back for one more season, really have a stellar year for the Rebels. And then when you look at the defense, obviously Troy Brown, the inside linebacker, a guy that transferred there from Central Michigan, had 91 tackles on the year, a guy that flies around to the football, not the biggest guy by any means. He's an undersized linebacker, but a guy that he's going to work hard, play hard through, from whistle to whistle. Otis Reese on the back end of the defense, 6'2", 215 pounds. Really a nickel, if you will. But look, back-to-back seasons with at least 80 tackles. Had 7 tackles for loss and 3 sacks this past season. Really a physical presence on the back end of the defense. I think he's a guy that could end up being a day 3 pick. Tavius Robinson is another interesting guy there on the edge. 5 tackles this past year. Look, he's 6'7", 245 pounds. Really long arms. Those traits, that's going to be something that's going to get him drafted, likely somewhere in that mid day 3 range, but a guy that I think could end up making that NFL roster, likely on the practice squad, allow him to continue to develop, really fill out his frame. A guy that I think could end up even playing a 5 technique in an on-man front at the next level when it's all said and done. So Ole Miss and Texas Tech, that'll round out our games on Wednesday, December 28th. You get to Thursday, December 29th, Syracuse taking on Minnesota. Obviously, when you're talking about Syracuse, the first name that has to come to mind is Sean Tucker. Unfortunately, we're not going to see Sean Tucker play. The explosive speed is one of the things that you think about with him. 5'10", 210 pounds, back-to-back seasons, over 1,000 yards, 23 touchdowns, 56 receptions, over the last 2 years. And, again, that dynamic ability, he ended up going out, running track for the Orange as well, really helped with some of that explosiveness. The breakaway speed is absolutely there. And then you have Matthew Bergeron, their standout offensive tackle. Would have loved to have seen Bergeron play in the bowl game. Unfortunately, we're not going to get to see that happen. He's 6'5", 315 pounds, the junior. I believe they said that he has gave up 5 sacks on the year. But when you think about Garrett Schrader, holds on to the football way too long. A lot of that really going to be coverage sacks, but when you watch him, he was aggressive against Isaiah Foskey. You see excellent footwork, taking him on as well. Keeps that pad level low, really good knee bend. That fundamentally sound athlete is really what you see out of Bergeron, a guy that I think could end up being a fringe first rounder. Obviously, keep an eye on some of the pressure, some of the sacks, but I think at the end of the day, Bergeron is going to be a guy that we're going to be talking about as a potential first rounder. I really do. Oronde Gadsden the second. Is he a tight end? Is he a receiver? I don't care. The guy just makes plays. Only a sophomore, so we won't be talking about him in this draft cycle, but really a guy to watch as a #1 target. Garrett Williams, the corner. Another interesting cat. He's 6 foot, 190 pounds, a physical guy. He's going to want to get his hands on you. A guy that I don't think had the best season this year. I think he battled some injuries at times, only played in 7 games, and so there is some bad tape out there of Garrett Williams. Really, that freshman season there in 2020, where he had 2 interceptions, one of which he took back to the house, 9 pass breakups, really got everyone on notice, right? And then follow that up with another solid season in 2021, had 5 tackles for loss, had 9 pass breakups, and then 2022 hits, the injuries start to set in a little bit, and I can see why there could be cause for concern. Maybe I should go ahead and decide to come out, but there's so many talented corners in this draft that I think it'd behoove him to come back to Syracuse, play 1 more year. I think that would make the most sense. Linebacker position as well, Michael Jones. Look, he's 6'1", 224 pounds. The junior, very active at that linebacker position, but I think he's another guy that needs to come back, play 1 more year. Don't decide to head out. I think he's played 4 years there for the Orange, but he could come back for 1 more season thanks to that 2020 COVID year. 109 tackles in 2021. Followed that up with 84 this past season. A guy that can get after the quarterback a little bit as well. I think of Michael, and I think of a guy like Zaire Franklin. A guy that, when he played at Syracuse, 6 foot, 236 pounds, a little bit of a bigger dude, but a guy that will fly around and make plays. When you talk about Zaire, 310 tackles, 31.5 going for loss, 8.5 sacks. You compare that with Michael Jones has done to this point, 299 tackles, 22 going for loss, 8.5 sacks. So the comparisons can absolutely be there. And I think Michael Jones, I'd love to see him come back for 1 more year, but if he does decide to call it a career, this is a guy that has really put together some good film there at Syracuse. So when Syracuse is on defense, they're going to have to deal with the likes of Mohamed Ibrahim. And Ibrahim, I wasn't sure if he was going to be playing in the bowl game or not, because this is a guy unfortunately had that knee injury when he was off to such a fantastic start this past season. Had 30 carries, 163 yards, and a couple of touchdowns. Ends up getting the knee injury in that first game, but follows that up this year with just under 1,600 yards on the ground and 19 touchdowns. A physical back, a guy that's going to be a downhill runner. He's going to be difficult to bring down. He'll be a day 3 guy. He'll probably end up being a 5th or 6th round pick, especially because he hasn't shown his ability to catch the football out of the backfield. And look, really, the Gophers, the way that their offense is run, they don't throw the football a ton. Tanner Morgan gets hurt, and obviously that really changes their game plan. It's really going to be centered around Ibrahim running the football. He's going to be a guy up front that you're really going to have to watch out for. He's going to be a lot of fun to watch. A guy that can run between the tackles, can get to the outside. He's not going to be the home run threat, but he will get his yards in bunches. And look, there's so many talented backs in the Big Ten. He's one of those guys that is people forget about. But because of that knee injury, but look, he's so patient. Once he gets his foot in the ground, gets downhill in a hurry, then he's going to drop his pad level and finish through the run. He's a dynamic running back, and I mean, what more can you ask for? And that's really what's going to be exciting to see. What the future holds for Mohamed Ibrahim at the next level. Switching gears from the Pinstripe Bowl at Yankee Stadium to the Cheez-It Bowl at Camping World Stadium in Orlando, Florida. Oklahoma taking on Florida State. Now the Sooners are going to be without their star running back Eric Gray, who's already opted out, wants to prepare for the NFL draft. 5'9", 206, over 1,300 yards on the ground, 6.4 yards per carry, 11 touchdowns. And look, this guy had 99 receptions in his career between Oklahoma and Tennessee. He's a guy that just continues to get better as the game goes on. He's a physical presence between the tackles, explosive burst, a guy that can get to the outside and can run away from you a little bit as well. So he's a guy that I think is going to be an early day 3, maybe a late day 2 pick when it's all said and done. I think the combine's really going to help his draft stock. Anton Harrison, I mentioned him earlier, a ton of length on the outside for Oklahoma. And a guy that I think has he has the traits that everybody looks for, and he has the length that everybody looks for, and has the reps that he's put together that shows that he can be a pass protector on the outside, and a guy that can also be a tremendous run blocker. But consistency is an issue with him. I think technique gets lost at times, but I think he's one of those guys that teams will look at and say, we can probably mold him into an NFL caliber starting offensive tackle. I think because of that, he'll probably be a day 2 guy. A lot of people are talking about him as a potential first round pick. I don't see it. I think he'll end up being a second rounder, but a guy that I think could end up being a starter when it's all said and done. Jalen Redmond, another guy up front for them, had 4 sacks, 10 tackles for loss, 6'3", 292 pounds, quick hands, quick first step coming off the football. He's decided to put his name into the hat as a next level defender up front. I look at Jalen Redmond. He's one of those guys to where I think he's going to have to really fight to get himself drafted. I think he can end up being a late day 3 guy, but to me, I think there are a lot of guys in this year's draft up front that excite me a little bit more than Jalen Redmond. Would have loved to have seen him come back to Norman for one more season. Deshaun White is an intriguing guy for me. 6 foot, 220 pounds. The linebacker, a guy that, look, I think about Brian Asamoah and Deshaun White flying around, making plays for the Sooners. A guy who has really good range, a guy that can drop into coverage, had 2 interceptions, 6 pass breakups, 80 tackles this past season, really as that key cog there at that linebacker position. Danny Stutzman, only a sophomore, a guy that, man, when he's on, he can make a ton of plays, but also miss a lot of plays. And really, Deshaun White was looked at as Mr. Consistency for the Sooners on the defensive side of the football. And when I mentioned Brian Asamoah, when you look at what he was able to do, 6'1", 228 pounds, was a 3rd-round pick of the Minnesota Vikings, number 66 overall, had 168 tackles in his 3 seasons there with the Sooners, 12.5 going for loss, 5 sacks. I look at Deshaun White and I see similar stats. I see similar numbers. I see similar play out on the field. These were 2 guys that worked really well when they were on the field together. I think Deshaun White is going to be a guy. He probably won't get drafted on day 2 unless he tests really well like Asamoah did. But a guy who I think will be a nice pickup for somebody there on day 3. And then obviously you have the explosive Marvin Mims, a guy who can be just a dynamic receiver, 5'11", 177 pounds, a guy that I think, it took a little while to build some of that chemistry with Dylan Gabriel, but now he's a 1,000-yard receiver. Look, a career 19.2 yards per reception guy, 20 touchdowns in his career as well. if he decides to come out, I wouldn't be surprised. I think he'd be a day 2 pick because of that explosiveness. I think he's going to test really well at the combine as well. Not the biggest guy by any means, but a guy that can definitely get vertical. You want to see a little bit more out of the route tree from him, but definitely a guy that can push defenses down the football field. I think that's what you're going to see against Florida State, is this guy just continuing to push the pedal downfield. Now, when you talk about Florida State, obviously the first guy that you have to talk about is Jared Verse. This dude is so explosive, a guy with tremendous bend, and he's just a lot of fun to watch. A guy that is definitely going to be a first-round pick, and I think a guy who's going to continue to see his draft stock just soar. I think he's a guy that could be a fringe top 10, top 15 player because of his explosiveness. And really what you want to see is, I would have loved to have seen him take on Anton Harrison, who won't be in this game. Wanye Morris, the guy on the other side, he's also opting out of this game to enter the draft, so we're not going to see Verse up against these guys. But look, 6'4", 248 pounds, explosive speed coming off the edge. You see the violent hands, the slap, the rip, able to get the edge. Uses a quick arm over as well. You'll see him work to the inside, get back outside. So he has a versatile pass rush repertoire, which is something that you're definitely excited to see if you're looking at the next level. 14.5 tackles for loss, 7.5 sacks, was a dynamic playmaker at Albany, transferred there to Florida State. This guy hasn't declared for the draft yet, so there is a chance. I think Florida State fans are really holding out hope that maybe he could come back for one more season. I think that'd be a big coup for Mike Norvell if he did decide to come back for one more year. Obviously, their leading tackler is Jamie Robinson. He's the guy that you really have to talk about on the back end of that defense. 5'11", 199 pounds, a guy that just he makes plays. He's a veteran guy. 7 interceptions in his career, 15 pass breakups. A guy that can play around the line of scrimmage a little bit, does everything that is asked of him. Over 300 career tackles at South Carolina and Florida State. And a guy who I think he'll be a day 3 guy, but a guy that I think will end up making an NFL roster and could end up being a starter when it's all said and done. When you talk about guys at Florida State, from Terrence Brooks to Terrell Buckley, all these really dynamic secondary players, I think Jamie Robinson is the next guy to really hear his name called there at the NFL level. Moving on from the Cheez-It Bowl to the Alamo Bowl in San Antonio, we've got the number 20th ranked Texas Longhorns taking on the number 12 Washington Huskies. Washington already gotten some big news from a lot of guys that they are coming back for one more season. Michael Penix Jr., probably the biggest name. Penix Jr. really surprised people, I think, with the arm strength. I saw it at Indiana. This guy, 8th in the Heisman voting this past season as well. 66% completion percentage, over 4,300 yards, 29 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. So 7 interceptions were very costly. But look, this was a guy at Indiana, battled injuries. When he was healthy, this was a guy that you saw the arm talent, you saw his ability to make plays, but just struggled at times there at Indiana. Over 60% completion percentage in his first 2 seasons, then sub 60% his final 2 seasons with the Hoosiers. Comes to Washington, really gets to showcase what he can do, and I think coming back for one more season is absolutely something that he needs to do. So I'm glad to see that happen. He's got a couple of 1,000-yard receivers, guys that we're going to be talking about in next draft cycle. Obviously, Rome Odunze is a big physical receiver, 6'3", 200 pounds, over 1,000 yards. Like I said, this past season, to go along with Jalen McMillan, 6'1", 180 pounds, a guy who could be a vertical threat. 8 touchdowns on the year for him. Those are 2 receivers that are going to be dynamic. I could see them entering next year's draft. Very explosive. I mentioned other guys that were coming back for one more year. Braylon Trice, he's a big physical dude, a guy that has a tremendous burst. 8 sacks on the year. He's decided he's coming back to Seattle, as is Zion Tupuola-Fatui, the outside linebacker, a guy that's battled some injuries, and a guy that didn't start the entire season there for the Huskies. So I think really getting a full season under his belt and putting together some really good game film is what you're going to want to see there. Washington, though, you've got some guys up front that you're going to have to watch and keep an eye out for. Obviously, Jackson Kirkland was the guy that everybody was talking about because he looked like a bona fide offensive tackle prospect. Injuries really slowed him down. He's now kicked inside to guard. He's 6'7", 300. He's a guy that I think people are going to continue to keep an eye out for, but I think the red flags from an injury standpoint will be too much for him. He may not even get drafted when it's all said and done. The left tackle, Troy Fautanu, he's 6'4", 312 pounds, only a redshirt sophomore. He'll probably come back, but a guy who is very exciting to watch. He's very quick, light on his feet. You see the hands, able to easily strike and keep the defensive end off of his path. Does a great job redirecting, not only in pass protection, but then also in the running game, that leg drive as well. Needs to watch himself, with lunging when he gets out into space. So he'll try to hit that moving target. He'll lunge at him, and he will lose his balance, sometimes even fall down without even touching anybody. A guy who I think will ultimately transition to the guard spot when it's all said and done at the next level. And then, the last guy you have to talk about is Henry Benivulu. He's 6'7", 307, nearly 35-inch arms. He's very tough along the interior of that line. He's another guy that I think NFL teams are going to be watching for here, taking on Texas, especially when you have to take on a guy like Keandre Coburn, a dude who is as big as a house. For Texas on the interior of that defense. 6'2", 348 pounds. The short area burst is actually pretty impressive for this dude. 15 tackles for loss, 6.5 sacks. He's so stout at the point of attack. A guy who, I think he gets a lot of reps there for Texas. So a guy that I don't think is going to wear down a ton. Played in over 50 games for the Longhorns. He's really a guy to me that is interesting as that defensive tackle. I think a guy who's going to end up being a day 2 pick, and a guy that can end up being in the league for a long time at that nose tackle position. A junior who's really gotten interesting is Jalen Ford there for Texas. Look, 6'3", 234 pounds, a guy who flies around, just seems to always make plays. You turn on the film and 41 is everywhere. He was making plays behind the line of scrimmage, making plays, sacking the quarterback, making plays running laterally sideline to sideline, can drop into coverage a little bit as well. I think Jalen Ford's really made a name for himself, and he's a guy that I hope comes back for one more season. He's 6'2", 221 pounds, over 100 tackles this past season, 10 tackles for loss, 4 interceptions as well, 3 forced fumbles. But I could also see him deciding to enter the draft just because he had such a dynamic year. But you worry about guys who have just 1 year of production under their belt. I'd love to see him come back and showcase his ability again and be one of those guys that we could talk about in the top 50 or 60 picks. Bijan Robinson won't be playing in the bowl game, but we know he's going to be the number 1 running back taken in the draft. I think if I'm the Eagles, I strongly consider Bijan Robinson on the top end of that draft, but a guy who also, he's not going to get past round number 1. He's so explosive. Look, 6 foot, 215 pounds, finished 9th in the Heisman voting, over 1,500 yards on the ground, 6.1 yards per carry, 18 touchdowns, 19 receptions. You watch him as a pass catcher, and he looks like a receiver with the body control, his ability to contort his body in the air, tremendous footwork along the sideline as well. And then, look, he has tremendous speed. He can run away from you, has the power between the tackles. He's reminiscent of Saquon Barkley. I'm not putting him, in that same conversation as Saquon. I don't think he's quite as physical or quite as strong as Saquon is, but Bijan has that the contact balance, the physicality, and the speed, his ability to run away from guys. He's going to be interesting. I think he'll test really well. It's just going to be a question of exactly how high he comes off the board. If there's a team like Philly who, look, they're deep at every position, if they're looking at it and they're saying, all right, this is a luxury pick, middle of round number 1, then why not? Would you take him in the top 10? He's probably not a guy that I would take in the top 10 if you're talking about running backs, but I wouldn't put it past Howie Roseman and company to take a guy like that. They've obviously, when you look at their tight ends, they had Zach Ertz. They still drafted Dallas Goedert in round number 2. They've got Miles Sanders on the roster. Wouldn't put it past them to decide to go after Bijan Robinson as well. Load up at multiple positions. I could absolutely see that happening. They obviously need to get better up front. And so I think that's really where their primary concern will be. That's probably what the focus is going to be. But Bijan, again, is going to be a first-round running back when it's all said and done. Just won't be playing in this bowl game. But I think there's still a lot to like in this game. A lot of athletes, a lot of players to be excited for. Not only for this year's draft, but next year's draft as well. So transitioning from Thursday the 29th to Friday December 30th, you've got Maryland taking on NC State, number 23 ranked Wolfpack in the Duke's Mayo Bowl. And with Maryland, you're not going to see Dante Demas, their outstanding receiver on the outside. Had that ugly leg injury a season ago, but look, 6'3", 217 pounds. A guy who has tremendous length as a receiver. A guy that can make plays down the field as well. I think, testing is going to be a key for him. Really show that he can be explosive, stretching the defense. He has that length, but the question is going to be, can he separate on a consistent basis? I think that's really going to be a huge question mark for Dante Demas. When you look at Maryland, obviously you have to talk about Jalen Duncan. Duncan hasn't indicated that he's not going to play in the game, so I think, and I think it's a good decision for him to play in the bowl. This is a guy who could be a potential first-round pick. People talk about him as that dancing bear, a guy that is very light on his feet. You watch him; he plays with that flat back, knee bend, the hands, but there's a lot of bad tape on him as well. I thought that he struggled at times, against a lot of edge rushers. You saw him against, Mike Morris. You saw him against Zach Harrison. You saw him against JT Tuimoloau. Some of these elite edge rushers, and he struggled at times. But then there were also reps where he was able to anchor, really drop his weight, and stifle the rush by Zach Harrison. Aggressive, getting out to them, getting his hands on them very well. Leverage on Mike Morris, getting under that pad level, really keeping the hands inside, neutralizing him, active hands. So it's just, how can we cut down on those ugly reps? That's really the biggest thing, because there are a lot of really, really good things that Jalen Duncan did throughout the 2022 season. 6'6", 315 pounds, a fringe first rounder. I think he'll probably see his draft stock pushed to day 2, although depending on how he tests, he could end up falling back into that day 1 consideration. So it'll be interesting to see how things play out for him. Raheem Jarrett, 6 foot, 190 pounds. He's going to be a weapon in the slot. Battled some injuries during the season as well, but he'll be a guy to keep an eye out for. Jacorian Bennett and Deonte Banks, the two corners. Jacorian Bennett, a little undersized, 5'11", 195 pounds, probably best in the slot, but has really good ball skills. He can be physical at the top of the route. You'll see the ability to make plays on the football. Deonte Banks is the bigger receiver. He's 6'2", 205, can get physical. The thing that you really see is the makeup speed. He closes the gap in a hurry, gets right on the hip, and able to open up his hips when he needs to. Can make plays on the football as well. Those are two corners that I think we'll hear their names called on I think Banks possibly on day 2, but I think they'll both hear their names called before the end of round number 5 when it's all said and done. So Maryland taking on NC State, and obviously we know that Devin Leary, he tore his pec muscle. He's no longer there. He's following Will Levis to Kentucky, so he's no longer on the roster, but there's still guys to talk about there for NC State. And obviously defensively, the guy that you're going to have to look out for is Peyton Wilson. And Peyton Wilson is a tackling machine. He just needs to stay healthy. That's really the biggest thing for him, because when he does, he's a guy that just he flies around to the football. He's instinctive. He plays fast. He's big, 6'4", 235 pounds. Had a tremendous year in 2020 when he was healthy. 108 tackles, 11.5 tackles for loss. Really was a guy that turned a lot of heads, and there was a lot of excitement. Injured his shoulder in the second game of the year in 2021 against Mississippi State. Missed 10 games. When healthy, this is a guy who has tremendous range. He can fly around to the football, can drop into coverage a little bit. I watched that game against North Carolina, and he's playing a tight end on a wheel route, had inside leverage. Quarterback throws up the sideline, gets his head around, makes a leaping effort. Really, ball was in his hands and just kind of lost it when he went to the ground, but he has that ability, right? He can get after the quarterback and rush the passer a little bit. Can get skinny through holes and get penetration early and be disruptive as well. Can run plays down behind the line of scrimmage, but I think health is really going to be the biggest concern when we're looking at Peyton Wilson. Drake Thomas is really one of their best edge rushers, 6 foot, 230 pounds, only a junior, so I think Drake Thomas is likely going to come back for one more season. But when you look at him, back-to-back years with 90-plus tackles, double-digit tackles for loss, at least 6 sacks, had 3 interceptions in 2021, 4 pass breakups. He's a guy that I'd love to see come back for another season and be one of those guys to continue to build his resume and be a guy that we're talking about, in the first 2 days of the draft. Pittsburgh taking on UCLA. We know with Pittsburgh, Keaton Slovis transferring to BYU, Kalijah Cansey, the exceptional defensive tackle, is sitting out. We'll be talking about him quite a bit. He's sitting out to opt out for the draft. You look at UCLA, the number 18th ranked Bruins. Look, Dorian Thompson-Robinson, DTR, is a quarterback that people have to get to know. A guy who's a tremendous athlete. He will get drafted on day 3. I think there's enough to his game to where he will get himself drafted. Is he a guy that's going to end up, as a starter at the next level? No. But he's a gamer. He's a guy that's dynamic with the ball in his hands, over 1,800 yards on the ground, improved his completion percentage, just by leaps and bounds this past season. Just under 70% completion percentage. Needs to cut down on the interceptions, but and some of the poor decision making. You saw that against USC. Didn't see the linebacker that's undercutting the route. Some really unfortunate timing to some of his interceptions. Zach Charbonnet, to me, is one of the best running backs in this year's draft class. 6'1", 220 pounds, over 1,300 yards on the ground, 7 yards per carry, 14 touchdowns, also had 37 receptions. That dynamic receiver. He is a one-cut-and-go type of a guy, but can make you miss out in the open field, will drop his pad level and run you over, and he may not be a guy that's going to ultimately outrun you, but he's going to get a ton of yards in bunches, and I think he can be a 3-down back because of his ability to catch the football coming out of the backfield. I would have loved to have seen Pittsburgh and Kalijah Cansey, seeing what they can do there with Zach Charbonnet. When I think about Pittsburgh, I look at Servassier Dennis, their active middle linebacker, 6'1", 230 pounds, 94 tackles this past season, 12 going for loss, 7 sacks, very active, a guy that times his blitzes well, can be explosive there, can drop into coverage a little bit. I think he's going to be very exciting to watch. And then Israel Abanikanda, the running back, 5'11", 215 pounds, a guy that only a junior, over 1,400 yards on the ground, 20 touchdowns. Really, Keaton Slovis kind of slowed by the injuries and the concussions, and they had to really lean heavily on Abanikanda, and we really got to see him showcase what he can do. He's a guy to watch out for on the offensive side of the football, and could decide to enter the draft if he so chooses. When you look at the next game on the schedule, it's really going to be a fun one to watch. Notre Dame taking on South Carolina. Irish ranked number 21. Gamecocks now at number 19. Took down 2 top 10 teams. They get to play in the Gator Bowl there. I think it'll be a virtual home game for the Gamecocks. And we get to see Spencer Rattler really spin the football, struggle for much of the year, but when it counted against top 10 teams, Spencer Rattler stepped up and just was absolutely dynamic. Just throwing dime after dime, showcasing that arm strength and showing why he was really looked at as one of the top quarterbacks coming into last season. 6'1", 200 pounds, tremendous arm strength. Look, what he did against Tennessee, the 6 touchdown passes was absolutely ridiculous. Follows that up and able to really take down Clemson. Against Tennessee, 81% completion percentage, 438 yards, 6 touchdowns, 0 sacks. First 10 games, 65% completion percentage, 198.2 passing yards per game, 8 touchdowns, 9 interceptions. He's a big reason why we're talking about the Gamecocks in the Gator Bowl this year, and there's a lot to be excited about if you're a Gamecock fan going into 2023. His dynamic receiver, Antoine Wells, the James Madison transfer, 6'1", 207. This is a dude who was making plays all over the field, and he's going to be a dynamic playmaker, that's for sure. They're going to miss Zach Pickens on the defensive side of the football, 6'4", 305, a guy who can that short area burst to get after the quarterback a little bit, has pretty good length there to neutralize the point of attack. And then obviously Cam Smith, a guy who can end up being a first-round pick, 6 foot, 188 pounds, played the nickel quite a bit there for the Gamecocks, but a guy who can play on the outside, he can play on the inside, he can play the nickel, wherever you need him. That versatility is really going to bode well for him at the next level, especially when we're talking about where he can go in the draft. For the Irish, we know that Michael Mayer, the top tight end, a guy who's going to be a first rounder when it's all said and done. I mean, Michael Mayer, a guy who is the best receiving tight end in this year's draft, the best blocking tight end in this year's draft, the most complete tight end we've seen in a little while. So he's a guy that could end up getting drafted potentially in the first half of round number 1. He won't be in this bowl game, but a guy who will be is Isaiah Foskey, one of the better pass rushers in this year's draft, a guy who has an outside chance at a late round 1, probably going to be a round 2 pick, 6'4", 257, bends really well coming off the edge, back-to-back seasons with at least 10 sacks. The one concern, if you look at him, is 20 and a half sacks, just 24 tackles for loss. So when you're talking about him making plays behind the line of scrimmage, you'd like to see him being disruptive against the run as well as the pass. But look, this is a guy, again, you see the athleticism, you see the hand usage, you see his ability to bend. Dude had 2 block punts against UNLV, so you see the athleticism there. Against USC, Jordan Addison was taking off down the field. He was able to chase him down, punch the football out from behind, chase him down 25 yards down the field. Excellent hand usage, excellent effort. This guy plays with his hair on fire. To me, he should be a first-round pick. I think he may end up falling to round number 2, but everything screams first rounder to me, and a guy that he can play with his hand in the dirt. You can stand him up as well. He has some of that positional versatility, so I think it'll be interesting to see what happens with Isaiah Foskey. A big game here could really solidify his status as a first round pick, which then takes us to Ohio and Wyoming in the Barstool Sports Arizona Bowl. A game that, if you're looking to tune in on this, it's basically going to be aired on Barstool. And when you're talking about Ohio, their dynamic quarterback, Curtis Rourke, and his health is the biggest concern. You want to be able to see him in the bowl game because, look, this guy over 3,000 yards passing, 69% completion percentage, 25 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. But a guy that's going to come back to the Bobcats next season, a guy that is likely to enter the draft. We're talking about Sam Wiglusz, the receiver, 5'11", 188 pounds, transfer from Ohio State. In his only year with the Bobcats, 69 catches, 850 yards, 11 touchdowns, a guy who is a savvy route runner, a guy that knows how to get open. He's going to be a guy that's going to be really leaned upon in that passing attack for Ohio. And then with Wyoming, what's interesting is we had Xavier Valade. He's ultimately transferred to Arizona State before the season began. Wyoming's just a really young team. We don't have anybody who's really draft eligible to talk about. We have Easton Gibbs, a guy that we're talking about, starting next draft cycle. 111 tackles this past season, 6'2", 227 pounds. Technically, he is draft eligible because he is a third-year sophomore. But a guy who obviously is going to come back and play for the Cowboys for at least 1, if not 2 more seasons. 242 tackles so far in his career, 17.5 going for loss, 5 pass breakups as well. A guy who has a nose for the football. And how about Devon Harris? 6'4", 223 pounds. He's an undersized defensive end, but a guy who just knows how to get after the quarterback. In his first year of really sustained action and significant action, 13 tackles for loss, 8 sacks, a guy who I think is really going to, he led the pass rushers. They had 5 guys with at least 4 sacks this past season, and Devon Harris was the guy that really was the guy that was really starting the drink there in terms of that pass rush. So I think the future will be bright for Wyoming, especially on the defensive side of the football. And then you've got Tennessee taking on Clemson, Orange Bowl, Hard Rock Stadium in Florida there. Tennessee, number 6 in the country, taking on Clemson, number 7 in the country. So the 6 and 7 teams. And when you're talking about these two teams, obviously we were talking about a lot of guys who are going to opt out of this. We have the Blitnikoff Award winner Jalen Hyatt, a vertical threat, a guy who obviously racked up a ton of yards, a ton of touchdowns. And that's why he ultimately ended up winning that Blitnikoff Award. You worry about him, though, that vertical presence, that vertical threat. Is he going to be another Corey Coleman? Is there more to his route tree? We're going to have to really see what this guy can do. Really study the game film, because he had that breakout season here this past year. And you're talking about, obviously, that was when Cedric Tillman went down to injury. Cedric Tillman, another guy, really sitting out more because of the injury than anything else. But Tillman is a guy that, obviously we're talking about Hyatt, likely a first-round pick because of that explosiveness. With Cedric Tillman, he's a bigger receiver. He's 6'3", 215, a guy that, a season ago, 17 yards per reception, over 1,000 yards, 12 touchdowns. The injuries really kind of limited his effectiveness stretching the football down the field. This was a guy who I thought could win those 50-50 balls, can stretch the defenses a little bit vertically. You worry about that a little bit, especially with the injury. What's he going to test? What is that really going to show at the All-Star games as well? Because he is a senior, he just opted out of the game. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there for Cedric Tillman. Obviously, we know Hendon Hooker won't be playing because of the knee injury. I still think he's going to be a day 2 pick. This is a guy, he's going to need time to develop a little bit more. He is 25 years of age, so that has to be a concern for NFL teams. When you look at Josh Heupel and that offense, the fact that they run those wide splits, the NFL is not designed like that. It's going to take him a little bit to really adjust with that new playbook. But the guy that I'm looking forward to seeing play is Darnell Wright. Would have loved to have seen him take on Myles Murphy. This is a guy who did a really good job against Will Anderson, and I think his draft stock is continuing to rise. A guy who I won't be surprised if we start talking about him in round number 1 as people continue to study the tape on him. A guy who, look, he's 6'6", 335 pounds, had some really good reps against Jalen Carter when Tennessee took on Georgia as well. You love the hands. He's physical. The lateral agility, especially against Will Anderson. That was one of the things that you absolutely saw when Anderson tried to get to the inside, a real strong power step and gets in there. And then the biggest thing was when Will Anderson would have those secondary moves. That's where Darnell Wright would get beat at times. So that's really where Wright has to work on, is that change of direction, especially with those secondary moves. But a guy who I'm really excited about at the next level. With Clemson, right now it looks like Brian Bresee is likely going to be playing. And really with Bresee, the biggest thing that you have to worry about is his overall health. When this guy was burst onto the scene as a true freshman, he was absolutely dynamic. And that was one of the things that you absolutely that you see glimpses of even now. But as a true freshman, this guy, 6.5 tackles for loss, 4 sacks. The explosive get off at that 3 technique was unparalleled for a guy at his age. But Fansided broke things down, and they noted that, look, after playing 432 snaps as a freshman, he was limited to 4 games and 145 snaps in 2021, 301 snaps in 11 games this past season. So that's 878 snaps plus the Orange Bowl in 3 seasons, 2 of which were plagued by injury. So when you think about that, 50 snaps a game, you're looking at somewhere between 16 or 17 full games. So as they noted there, it's a very short career. Marty Coleman doing a great job breaking things down in terms of what that looks like for Brian Bresee. It makes sense for me to see Brian Bresee play in this bowl game, really showcase his ability, and to show everyone that, look, that health should not be a concern. This is going to be somebody who you can draft in the top half of round number 1, and that's really the big thing when you're talking about the investment. And in round 1, you want to be able to say, okay, this is going to be my guy. This is who I'm going to go after. A guy that we can rely on as a playmaker. For the first contract into the second contract. Hopefully we can have him for a decade plus. Bresee, I mentioned Asim Richards earlier from UNC. Look, Brian Bresee, when he was lining up over him, made him look silly. Quick arm over to the inside, chases after the quarterback. Drake May in that game. And I look at my notes, and it's just burst, using his hands to clear. Athleticism, chasing down running backs. That's one of the things that he was absolutely. You allow him to play in space. You also saw him standing up guards at the point of attack, inside zone plays where he's able to beat the block using his hands, stack, shed, and drop the running backs in the backfield. Brian Bresee is a guy. People are comparing him to Taven Bryan. Is he going to have similar production at the NFL level? That's really the big concern that you have. So Brian Bresee, hats off to you for likely playing in this game. I'd love to see him actually come back for one more year. The injuries over the last 2 may ultimately propel him into the draft, but the injury concerns could also be a reason why, hey, let's get him back for another year in a Clemson uniform and really let him have a full season under his belt. I still see him entering the draft because he's a guaranteed first-round pick unless something catastrophic happens. He's going to be a top 20 pick, but good on him for playing in this game, because look, we'd love to see his last game in a Clemson uniform in dominating fashion. If he can put together some really good reps against Darnell Wright, even better. We'll also get to see Trenton Simpson, the linebacker, likely going to be a first-round pick if he decides to come out. 6'3", 225 pounds. The range laterally is exceptional. Speed coming off the edge, blitzing, getting after the quarterback. Can drop into coverage a little bit as well. The explosiveness, the versatility. He's a guy that, look, Isaiah Simmons was the freakish athlete. He's not quite on that level, but he's pretty close in terms of the overall athleticism. He hasn't declared yet, but he'll be an exciting player to watch throughout the draft process if he decides to come out this year. Tyler Davis, another guy up front who's battled injury, 6'2", 300 pounds. The junior, when he's healthy, can be a menace, can be a force, but he's battled injuries this year. Had the torn biceps as well in 2021. If he could stay healthy, just that explosiveness coming off the ball, plays with excellent leverage, keeps that pad level low, and fires through gaps. He can be an exciting player to watch. One guy, as I mentioned earlier, who won't be in the bowl game is Myles Murphy, 6'5", 275, the junior. A lot of people think he's the number 1 defensive end prospect. And look, he's going to test through the roof. This guy, when you look at him, the 40 times are ridiculous. Really everything that this guy has screams top 5, top 10 pick potential. The production, look, 36 tackles for loss, 18 and a half sacks in his career. A guy that is a tremendous athlete. You love the wingspan to him. 5 pass breakups. Has 6 forced fumbles in his career as well. Knows how to, what to do when he gets to the football. The explosiveness, the lower body explosiveness. You'll see that in the vertical leap, the broad jump as well. His ability to turn the corner in a hurry, the change of direction. He has all the tools. Just hasn't really put together an explosive performance in his career to this point. And I think that's really the one thing that you're really wanting to see from him. He has all the traits that are there, the traits that are necessary. Against Florida State, I think that was a team that he seemed to really elevate his game against, with a couple of sacks. Each of the last 2 games had 3.5 tackles for loss in those games as well. What you love about Myles Murphy is he'll play both the pass and the run, and because of his athleticism, he's going to do things that Trayvon Walker it was able to do in last year's draft, and that draft cycle. And I think that's going to turn a lot of heads, force people back to the game film and say, you know what, this guy can do a lot of the little things, and he's so athletic. We can turn him into a complete defensive end. And so I think it's going to be interesting to see his explosiveness versus the length, the strength, and the power of Tyree Wilson, that position battle, to see who's going to be the number one defensive end taken. I think it's going to be a lot of fun to watch throughout the entire draft process. You move to December 31st, Saturday. Bama taking on K-State, number 5 ranked Alabama Crimson Tide in the Sugar Bowl, taking on the number 9 ranked Wildcats. And with Alabama, we've talked a lot about Bryce Young, Heisman Trophy winner a season ago, and the intelligence, the calmness, in that pocket, just the poise, mature beyond his years, his ability to manipulate the pocket. He's not I think he's a reluctant runner, but he'll take off and run when he needs to. A guy that he does a great job manipulating that pocket, being able to roll out a little bit, reset, and stay within that pocket. And when he does that, he can be very special. And that's one of the things that you absolutely love about him. Obviously, you have Will Anderson on the defensive side of the football, a freakish talent there at the outside linebacker position. Bednarik Award winner, Nagurski Award winner. A guy who is just the get off is unreal. The bend is just okay. It's not tremendous, but he's so explosive, knows how to get to the quarterback. The repertoire of pass rush moves, the hands. You can go on and on with superlatives for him. Those two guys could end up being 2 of the top 3 picks in this year's draft. They've both said that they are playing in this game, even though it's not in the playoff. Good on the 2 of them. K-State, you've got Deuce Vaughn, who basically looks like a Darren Sproles clone. The feet, so quick in the hole, hides behind the defenders and then pops out, and he's basically a bowling ball for a guy who is just 5'7", 5'6", 5'7", but has tremendous speed, breakaway speed, tremendous receiver as well. And then Cooper Beebe on that offensive line, another guy who's exceptionally physical at the point of attack. He has the ability to play tackle if you need to. So he's a guy that has that versatility. 6'4", 322 pounds, only a junior, but I could see him potentially entering the draft. A guy who could be that fringe day 2, early day 3 guy. Very physical at the point of attack, as I mentioned, generates a ton of movement, especially in the running game, blocking for Deuce Vaughn. And then defensively, obviously, you've got Julius Brents, 6'4", 202, tremendous length. I think that's really the thing that jumps out on the film. Struggled at times. With Quentin Johnson there in the Big 12 championship, but then there were other plays where this guy was just making plays on the football. Just a great job reading, reacting, and the ball skills are absolutely evident. So he's a guy that I think as the draft process goes along, teams are really going to be studying the film a lot more, with a guy with that type of length. And when he gets to line up against Bama, who is without a true number 1 wideout, I think you're going to get to see Julius Brents really showcase some of that ball hawking ability. I think it's actually going to be a much closer game than people really are thinking right now. Kentucky, obviously Will Levis is a potential top 10 pick there at that quarterback spot. There's, when you talk about traits, this guy has those in abundance, right? But he plays the quarterback position with the linebacker's mentality. He needs to dial that back. Teams are hungry for the next Josh Allen. They think Will Levis is going to be that guy. Played in an NFL style offense, understands where to go with the football. Tremendous arm strength. Needs to cut down on the mistakes. Tremendous athlete. But he won't be in the game. Neither will Chris Rodriguez, their powerful running back, a guy that is a downhill force. Had to sit out, was suspended for the first 4 games, so he'll be a guy that'll have to answer to that. Iowa, though, Jack Campbell, or do everything linebacker. I believe he was a Campbell Trophy winner. Very intelligent player as well. A guy that he flies around to the football. He's 6'5", 243 pounds. Back-to-back seasons, over 100 tackles, 140 last year, 115 this year. A guy that can drop into coverage a little bit, but he's really at his best going downhill. He can be a 3-down linebacker. Can get into those throwing lanes, can actually show off a little bit of range in terms of that catch radius as well. I think he's a better athlete than people really give him credit for, and look for him to showcase that a little bit here in this game. When you talk about Iowa as well, then you have to talk about the freakish dude up front. I think his nickname is Thor. I want to say it's 6'5", 264-pound Lucas Van Ness. And this dude, 17.5 tackles for loss, 12.5 sacks, a guy who just absolutely bowls over guys, just tremendous strength at the point of attack, so physical, runs through guys, runs them over, dominated just about anybody that he lined up against. And he's only a redshirt sophomore, but a guy who I think is garnering some of that buzz as a potential first rounder because of the physical skills. Does he come back to Iowa? Does he not? He's one of those intriguing prospects. Another intriguing guy is Riley Moss, the corner. 6'1", 194 pounds, incredibly productive. 11 interceptions, 25 pass breakups. A guy who I think doesn't get a lot of credit for being the ball hawk that he is. I think he's incredibly instinctive. I think he's a better athlete than people give him credit for as well. He'll be a guy in the pre-draft process. Really watch the hips, because he's a taller corner. Can he sink those hips, in and out of the cuts? Can he flip those hips and turn and run with the receiver? Those are going to be things that I think a lot of people are going to be watching as well from Riley Moss. TCU taking on Michigan. First of the college football playoff games. They're in the Fiesta Bowl. Number 3, Horned Frogs. Number 2, Michigan Wolverines. And, when I think of the Horned Frogs, obviously you look at the Heisman runner-up, Max Duggan, in the year that he's had. You can't help but think of the Red Rifle, Andy Dalton, with the way that Max Duggan plays out on the football field. Look, 65% completion percentage, over 3,300 yards, 30 touchdowns, just 4 interceptions. Dynamic playmaker, a guy that really is the heart and soul of TCU's offense. He'll be a day 3 guy. I know Andy Dalton ultimately came off the board in round number 2, 35th overall to the Cincinnati Bengals. Himself he was 9th in the Heisman voting back in 2010. Just for comparison, 66% completion percentage, over 2,800 yards, 27 touchdowns, 6 interceptions, had 1,600 yards on the ground as a runner with 22 touchdowns. Don't really think about that from Andy Dalton, but this guy, he really knew how to carry the football there. Was with the Horned Frogs from 2007 to 2010. Fast forward, 2022, Max Duggan doing a lot of crazy things as a senior. Over 1,800 yards on the ground, 25 touchdowns in his career as well. Remember, he was the starter. Chandler Morris took it over to start the year. Gets injured in their first game. Max Duggan comes out and has a year to remember. Kendre Miller, the running back, a physical presence up front, 6 foot, 206 pounds, over 1,300 yards on the ground, 17 touchdowns. Only a junior, could decide to enter the draft. A guy who could end up working his way into being a top 5 running back in this year's draft class. You've got Quentin Johnston, and when you talk about Big Q, this dude is a freakish athlete, 6'4", 193 pounds. 903 yards through the air this past season, 17 yards per reception, 5 touchdowns. A guy that does a great job vertically. You want to be able to see him separate in a lot of other routes. I think really where he was able to separate was down the field. A lot of late separation, able to clear some of that distance, go up, make some of those 50-50 catches. But his game reminds me a little bit of Drake London, to a degree, where Drake was able to take over games and really be virtually unblockable. You saw that with Quentin Johnston a little bit. I think Quentin Johnston at the end of the day is going to end up being the number 1 receiver taken when it's all said and done, though. D. Winters on the defensive side of the football, he's going to have to figure out a way to shut down Michigan's rushing attack. 6'1", 223 pounds, flies around to the football. A guy that looks 7.5 sacks, 11.5 tackles for loss. He's going to have to disrupt J.J. McCarthy quite a bit. He and the line up front, Dylan Horton is probably their most prolific pass rusher up front. 6'4", 244 pounds, a transfer from New Mexico, played the last 3 seasons with the Horned Frogs, 10 tackles for loss, 6.5 sacks. A guy that can get after the quarterback, uses his length to his advantage up front. And then obviously you've got Travius Hodges, and that's a guy that obviously is going to get a lot of the attention on the back end of that defense, and rightfully so. He's 5'9", 177 pounds, excellent ball skills, 5 interceptions, 32 pass breakups, a guy that likely is going to be a slot corner, a guy that's going to play on the inside, but is a dynamic playmaker, and a guy that just has a nose for the football. The Jim Thorpe Award winner, I might add. No Blake Corum, no problem. They just throw in Donovan Edwards and let him do his thing. Donovan Edwards, 6 foot 202, very explosive back. But obviously, not having Blake Corum, watching the effectiveness of Donovan Edwards, it makes you wonder about Blake Corum and some of the his ability running the football. Just in terms of his stat line, right? Over 1,400 yards on the ground, 18 touchdowns, but the effectiveness there with that Joe Moore award-winning offensive line 2 years in a row, running behind a line like that, it makes you wonder there with Blake Corum. Obviously, he had a knee injury and he won't be playing in the game. That guy, just a bowling ball as well, just so tough to tackle, physical, added about 15 pounds of muscle to his frame, and look, he was 7th in the Heisman voting because of everything that he did. Also a pretty good receiver coming out of the backfield, but if I'm looking at Michigan, I'm looking at their offensive line. Ryan Hayes, 6'7", 305, the tackle, physical. I think he'd be a great right tackle at the next level. Zach Zinter, to me, is so much fun to watch. Watch him on the interior of that offensive line. He's so physical at the point of attack. He's going to look to throw guys around. I think if he gets a chance to line up against Demonic Williams, I think he's finally 18 years of age, but he's physical at the point of attack. I think that's going to be a fun matchup. 65 for Michigan is nasty. He's a mauler. He wants to beat you up. He wants to throw you down. He wants to humiliate you. He's the type of guy that I would love to run behind if I were a running back. And then you have Olu Oluwatimi. And look, this is a guy, the Remington Trophy winner as a top center, 6'3", 307. To me, he's one of the better centers in this year's draft. A lot of people talk about, well, can he truly anchor? Is he, some of the athletic limitations? All I see when I put on the film is a guy that makes a ton of plays. Is a guy that can open up holes. You see the athleticism, being able to climb to the next level. He can get driven back off the ball, but you see him reset his feet, anchor, stop the momentum, can pull around, very good on the move as well, and just an intelligent player. So he's going to be someone that's going to be a lot of fun to watch defensively. The question is Mike Morris, their dynamic pass rusher, tremendous length on the outside, 6'6", 292. Is he going to be healthy? And then obviously you have Mozzie Smith, the nose tackle, 6'3", 337 pounds, explosive, guy that can get after the quarterback, can also be a menace against the run, uses his hands really well, and can get a good push up front. And then finally, on the back end of the defense, DJ Turner is a guy to watch out for. He really caused a lot of problems there for Charlie Jones. I know Charlie Jones had a tremendous year there, or a tremendous game in that Big 12 championship, but DJ Turner made a lot of plays. Very smooth in his transitions from his back pedal. And being able to flip his hips when he needs to, then plant and drive on the football. He's really a guy that I think has continued to get better as the season has progressed. So he'll be a lot of fun to watch there as well. And then when you look at Ohio State taking on Georgia, the number 4 ranked Buckeyes, Peach Bowl, it's a home game for the Georgia Bulldogs. a matchup to watch. Obviously, you're watching C.J. Stroud against that Georgia defense, and for me, watch C.J. Stroud, a guy who he can throw the deep ball, but he lacks the ability to drive that football with any kind of velocity on the short to intermediate routes. I think that's really what's going to get him into trouble. That offensive line, I think, can hold up at times against that Georgia pass rush, and then really what you're going to see is a dynamic secondary. Kelee Ringo, he's 6'2", 205. This is a guy that can struggle at times getting in and out of his breaks, and a guy that can be susceptible to be beaten there on the outside. So you're really going to see Marvin Harrison Jr., only a sophomore, but look, he's the best receiver in college football. I really don't think there's any question. The hands, the catch radius, the speed, the body control, he's got it all. He's a total package. The route running ability as well. Emeka Egbuka is not a shabby receiver himself. And so C.J. Stroud, he's throwing to a lot of wide open receivers. You see him process the game really well. You love his ability to throw his receivers open, throw with anticipation, obviously the ball placement. But when you talk about that arm strength, that's going to get him into trouble at the next level. Just watch it happen. Paris Johnson up front, he's the guy that I think can make himself a lot of money. Especially if he gets to go up against Jalen Carter, and if he can neutralize that beast, up front. That's really what you want to see. And with Paris Johnson, he played guard, moved outside to tackle, and a guy who I think is going to be in that consideration as potentially the number one offensive tackle in this year's draft, especially now that Olu Fashanu has decided to come back to Penn State. So Paris Johnson, look, 6'6", 310, the junior. He could generate movement as well in the running game, so that's going to be interesting to watch. Obviously you've got Travion Henderson and Mayan Williams. If they're healthy, I think Ohio State can run the football quite a bit. That'll also open up the passing lanes as well for C.J. Stroud. But when you talk about Georgia, you're looking at Jalen Carter up front, 6'3", 310. He and Quinnen Williams are two of the most explosive defensive tackles I think we've seen in quite some time. He's so versatile up front. He can line up at nose tackle, can line up at defensive end. Did that on the same drive, quite a bit. A guy who, I mentioned it against Oregon, just throwing, a big 320-pound offensive lineman to the ground. He stacks guys, sheds them, just throws them aside, and the strength at that point of attack. But he's also explosive, can get downhill in a hurry. Over the last 5 games going into that SEC championship, had 5 tackles for loss, 2 sacks, 2 forced fumbles. Have battled some injuries early on. This dude is just so explosive coming off the football. The strength, I think, that's the biggest thing. I think Quinnen Williams was quicker than him, but I think the power and the speed to power that you see from Jalen Carter, I think, is unparalleled. And so, Jalen Carter to Seattle, just pencil that in right now. I think Luke Whippler, the center, especially when Carter's lined up at that nose tackle position, keep an eye out for Ohio State's center. That matchup is going to be interesting. Broderick Jones, the left tackle, another guy who's going to be in consideration as a first-round tackle. He doesn't have the best size. He's 6'4", about 319 pounds, but he's so light on his feet, moves very well. A guy initially, I was wondering if he was going to have to kick inside, but you see the lateral ability, does a great job there. He does lack some ideal length that'll cause him to bend at his waist at times. I thought that's where he struggled against BJ Ojulari in that SEC championship a little bit. Got driven back by Keon White with his bull rush there against Georgia Tech. So some of the reps for him were a little questionable at times, but look, he's going to get to go up against some elite pass rushers with Zach Harrison there for Ohio State, a guy who has tremendous length. You're going to see the power there. Then Tui Moloau is more of the explosive edge rusher. He's only he's an underclassman, so he's going to be coming back. Zach Harrison will be draft eligible, and a guy that I think has really come on. I was waiting for him for so long to develop, and this year you finally seen it. He doesn't bend all that well, but he uses that length to his advantage. The speed to power is tremendous, and I really want to see what Broderick Jones can do against those two polar opposites in terms of those pass rushers. I think that's really going to be interesting. An interesting dynamic there for sure. And then obviously you've got Kenny McIntosh, the 6'1", 210-pound running back, a guy who has tremendous vision, especially with the outside zones, can run a little bit between the tackles, kind of an upright running style at times, excellent pass catcher, one of the better pass catchers in this year's draft class. Look, Georgia churns out running backs. They have guys that enter the draft every year, guys that are productive at the next level. He's just going to be the next guy. And then Stetson Bennett, a quarterback who's going to be drafted on day 3 at some point. 27-3 career record as a starter. Obviously, he's playing for a dynamic offense, but he knows where to go with the football. He makes great decisions, throws his receivers open, doesn't do too much, stays within the confines of the offense, and a lot of times at the next level, guys can really get things done. You look at what Taylor Heineke is doing for Washington, and these undersized quarterbacks. Stetson Bennett, look, he may not be the tremendous athlete that you're necessarily looking for. Heineke wasn't even drafted, but you see what he's able to do for Washington. Could be the same, similar situation there for Stetson Bennett. I think he at least gets himself drafted. I think Georgia and Michigan will likely come away with the win, but it'll be interesting to see what these matchups will bring. That's for sure. Mississippi State taking on Illinois on January 2nd. That's a Monday, and Illinois will be without the dynamic running back Chase Brown, a guy who has the speed on the outside, the power between the tackles. We will not get to see him, unfortunately. I was really looking forward to seeing that matchup. What you are going to see is Devin Witherspoon showcase his ability against an offense that we would have loved to have seen the Pirate Mike Leach, rest in peace, to a one-of-a-kind coach and person, just gone way too soon. And that offense that he has, taking that air raid from Hal Mummy, the one offense that the two of them really developed. And you look at Devin Witherspoon, what's he going to be able to do against Will Rogers and company? Look, 6 foot, 180 pounds. He's physical. Needs to watch some of the pass interference at times because he wants to get his hands on you quite a bit. But the ball skills were evident. He's going to be physical. He's going to be aggressive, and he's a playmaker. And that's one of the things that you love. You also see him in off coverage, eyes in the backfield, reading on the quarterback, reading the eyes, driving on the football in a hurry. Really no wasted movement, coming downhill and making a play on the football. So he's going to be a guy that I'm going to be watching for sure, obviously, as a potential first-round corner. His twin brother, Sidney Brown, the safety, a guy that makes plays on the back end of the defense, 6 foot, 205, a guy who's going to be a day 3 prospect, but I think he's going to probably get drafted than people really might be expecting because he's a ball hawk. Much like Devin Witherspoon, 6 interceptions this past season, 7 pass breakups, a guy who also has 10 tackles for loss to go along with 320 tackles in his 5-year career there in Champaign. So I think the Brown brothers, moving on to the next level, we'll be talking about them quite a bit, especially throughout this draft process. Mississippi State is led by Will Rogers, and look, the junior, 6'2", 210 pounds. This is a guy that I would expect to come back for one more season, but he could decide to opt out and enter the draft. I wouldn't be surprised if he did that. Look, over 70% completion percentage, over 10,000 yards, 81 touchdowns, 22 interceptions. Look, you think about a guy like Gardner Minshew, who was able to really play well in a Mike Leach run offense. Will Rogers, another guy that kind of fits that same type of a mold, and really a leader through the tragedy for the team. Minshew, you'll recall, it was a 6th round pick of the Jacksonville Jaguars in the 2019 draft, coming out of Washington State. 1 year with the program, 70% completion percentage, over 4,700 yards, 38 touchdowns, 9 interceptions. So when I look at Will Rogers and what he's been able to do, that sustained success for the Bulldogs over the past 3 years, he doesn't really have anything left to prove. He may decide that he wants to come back and do it one more time in Mike Leach's honor. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with him. This may be the year for him to enter the draft because of some of the big names in next year's draft class. Caleb Williams, to Drake May, to J.J. McCarthy, to Quinn Ewers. It'll be interesting to see. To Michael Penix Jr., can't forget him, Bo Nix, and what he's been able to do as well. So I think this may end up being the year for Will Rogers. We'll see what happens, but it'll be an intriguing test going up against the likes of Devin Witherspoon and Sidney Brown on the back end of that Illini defense. That was the ReliaQuest Bowl in Raymond James Stadium, Tampa, Florida. Isn't it fitting that the Bulldogs will be playing in a stadium with the pirate ship? Love it. Tulane, Green Wave, tremendous season. Number 16th ranked Green Wave taking on the USC Trojans, number 10 in the land, in the Cotton Bowl, in Jerry's world. And when you talk about Tulane, you have to talk about Tyjae Spears. Tyjae Spears is a dynamic running back, a guy that can make plays, both on the inside and on the perimeter. 5'10", 190 pounds, not the biggest frame, but a guy that still packs a wallop. He can run through you. Tremendous contact balance, that low center of gravity with the way that he runs, and then his ability to bounce off guys and get to the edge, and then he has that game-breaking speed that's just off the charts. 1,376 yards on the ground, 15 touchdowns, 21 receptions as well. This is a guy, career 6.6 yards per carry. Just a dynamic back. He's a lot of fun to watch, and the Trojans struggle against the run, and I think Spears is going to have a field day against this defense. I think he's going to end up with another 100-plus yard game. And when you talk about Tyjae Spears and the number of 100-yard games, you're talking about now 7 straight games, which is leads the FBS in terms of the active streak. He's a lot of fun to watch, and make sure that you tune in and catch number 22 there for the Green Wave. Now defensively, Dorian Williams, 6'2", 230 pounds. This is a guy who's athletic on the edge. He drops into coverage very well, can get after the quarterback a little bit, shows really good range, sideline to sideline. I think he struggles at times to get off blocks, especially when the linemen are climbing to that second level. But again, he can get good depth in coverage, backpedals, gets into a passing lane, reads the quarterback well, can blitz coming downhill. He's really their defensive leader, and I think in terms of anybody who has the most ability to be an NFL player and be a guy that can make plays at the next level, I think this is going to be the guy. 115 tackles this past season, 27 going for loss in his career, 9.5 sacks, 13 pass breakups, had a couple of interceptions this past season. Dude was everywhere for them, and he's going to be a lot of fun to watch there. You're going to need to have him make a lot of plays there against the USC Trojans. Trojans are going to be without Andrew Voorhees, their big 6'5", 320-pound left guard. Has experience at both left tackle and left guard for the Trojans, much like Elijah Vera Tucker. He's athletic. He has good power. I don't think he's quite as athletic as AVT, but he has the ability to potentially be a first rounder, likely going to end up being a second round pick. A guy that's battled an injury over the last few weeks, and so he'll be sitting out the bowl game because of that. Same with Jordan Addison. He hasn't officially declared for the draft, but expect him to. The Bolitnikoff Award winner from a season ago. So explosive with his route running ability, so effective with his vertical speed as well. Has some really long arms, so you see the large catch radius to him as well. I think that, like I said, the route running is going to be key to his game. He's not the biggest guy, but man, when you think of the Slim Reaper, Devontae Smith, I think Jordan Addison fits right into that same build. So I think you're talking about a guy that's going to be probably in that mid first round range, anywhere from 13 to 23, 25 on the back end for Jordan Addison when it's all said and done there. If you've listened to my podcast, you'll know that my favorite player is Tuli Tuipulotu there for the Trojans, a guy who people aren't giving him the credit that he deserves. Was among the top edge rushers in the country, led the nation in sacks with 12.5, 21 tackles for loss. This is a guy who just continues to get better. You see the hand usage, which is exceptional. A guy that can bend a little bit for a guy his size. I mean, when you talk about it, he's 6'4", 290 pounds. Can get off blocks, can get up the field in a hurry. He'll rush on the outside, on the inside. They have him as a stand-up linebacker, the guy that's even going to be shooting the A-gap, getting after the quarterback, and showed his ability to even drop into coverage a little bit. Taking on Michael Mayer, really jamming him at the top of his route. Really physical presence there as well. Struggles a little bit at times against the run. I think his recognition with the run needs to be sped up a little bit there. But a guy, to me, if he comes back, he hasn't decided yet if he's going to enter the draft or not. I think right now he'll be a second round pick. I really think that he's a first round talent. I think the biggest concern obviously is what he can do against the run. If he decides to come back for one more season, I think he can continue to develop that pass rush ability, but it's really going to be his play against the run. If he can elevate his play against the run, and this is going to be an interesting matchup against Tyjae Spears. Look, USC, that's been a porous defense, especially against the run. Alex Grinch hasn't been able to figure out how to slow down a lot of running backs. But if Tuli can have a really good day, not only rushing the passer, rushing Michael Pratt, but if he can also show his ability to play the run, that's going to bode well for him. You've got Mekhi Blackman on the outside, excellent cover skills, the ball skills. Really jump off the charts when you watch Mekhi Blackman. There's a ton of corner depth. So this is a guy that's probably going to fall to that 4th, 5th round range, but had 3 interceptions, 11 pass breakups this past season, really emerged after transferring from Colorado, and a guy that I think when you watch the ball skills, you understand what kind of ability he truly has. So I think he's going to be the guy on the defensive side, other than Tuli Pelotu, to really keep an eye out for there for USC. Almost done. LSU taking on Purdue, number 17th ranked Tigers. We know that Jaden Daniels and Kayshon Boutte will be returning to the Tigers. Jay Ward is going to be sitting out, as will BJ Ojulari. Really wanted to see Ojulari play, but look, he's done enough. Very active coming off the edge. Very dynamic playmaker. The guy that I really want to see play in this game, though, is Ali Gay. Ali Gay is his running mate there on the opposite side. Without BJ Ojulari, it's going to be Gay that's going to have to put all that pressure on Aiden O'Connell, the quarterback. He's 6'6", 250 pounds, tremendous length. 18 tackles for loss, just 7 sacks in his 3 seasons there with Tigers. Had that 6 pass breakup season there in 2020 through 10 games, 9.5 tackles for loss, 2 sacks. Hasn't really lived up to that level of production, and so I'm hoping that he can go out on a high note there for the Tigers. And then for Purdue, obviously I mentioned him earlier, we got to talk about Charlie Jones. Obviously the chemistry with a guy like Aiden O'Connell, who he grew up with in high school, and I believe before that, 6 foot, 188 pounds, so sudden as a route runner. His ability, just a knack to get open, over 1,300 yards as a receiver, 12 touchdowns as well. A guy who I think he'll end up being a day 3 guy, possibly get into that 3rd round consideration. I think he really should be a 3rd round pick, and a guy that's going to be a playmaker at the next level. I think this is a guy that we're going to be talking about as one of those surprises at that wide receiver position. And then finally, the Rose Bowl. Penn State taking on Utah. The Utes, number 8 in the country. Nittany Lions, number 11. The granddaddy of them all, as Keith Jackson would say. Utah's going to be without their top running back, Tavion Thomas, who also sat out the Pac-12 championship due to the ankle injury. This is a guy who's really more of a two-down running back, a guy that's is going to be physical between the tackles, but he's not nearly as dynamic as Zach Moss was for the Utes. But they're also going to be without the dynamic tight end Dalton Kincaid. Dalton Kincaid, to me, was really the MVP of this program. In terms of what he was able to do in some of the big games. 6'4", 242 pounds, 70 catches, 890 yards, 8 touchdowns, but really it was his performance against USC, the first time the Utes played the Trojans, that really sets things apart. Put the game film on, 16 catches, 234 yards, and a touchdown. Dynamic. When you look at that game against Arizona State, had a couple of touchdowns there, against Oregon, 11 catches for 99 yards. Colorado, a dynamic game with 5 catches for 102 yards and a score. But his ability to play on the outside, his ability to not only make the difficult catch, but then also make plays after he has the ball in his hands, is why I think Dalton Kincaid could end up being the number 2 tight end taken after Michael Mayer, because he can be such a dynamic weapon in the passing game. Unfortunately, we're also going to be missing out on 2 of the best corners to get the job done at the next level for both the Utes and Penn State. When you talk about Clark Phillips III, instinctive corner. 5'10", 191 pounds, can play on the outside, can play on the inside. 6 interceptions this past season. The ball skills are ridiculous with this kid. 4 pick sixes in his career. A guy that just seemed to make plays. You just didn't want to throw the football in his direction. I thought the performance against Jordan Addison, I thought he got the better of Addison on more plays than not. Those are 2 guys that are absolutely going to be first rounders. That was really a lot of fun to watch. Addison really got the better of Phillips on just one play, which was one of the plays there towards the end of the game where he was able to get open for a big play. But Clark Phillips, look, he would have been fun to watch against Parker Washington. Parker Washington, the receiver, is also opting out. He's declared for the draft. For me, when I look at Parker Washington, I was expecting to see him continue to elevate his game. 5'10", 212 pounds, going to be a slot receiver. Played in just 10 games this past season, 46 catches, 611 yards, 2 touchdowns. Some of the injury concerns there with him. Obviously, it makes sense that he did decide to opt out. But with Parker Washington, I would have loved to have seen him come back and play another year for Penn State. I just think that, I would have loved to have seen him elevate the game a little bit more. With some of these receivers in this receiving class, he's going to have to do a lot to really try to. He's not better than Zay Flowers. Zay Flowers is a guy who's going to be a borderline first, second rounder. There are going to be a lot of guys that he's going to have to be doing battle with. Can he be in that third round consideration, or will he fall to day 3? That's going to be a big question mark that I have for him. Then you have Joey Porter. Obviously, when you look at Joey Porter Jr., 6'2", 195 pounds, tremendous length. You see his ability to stick like glue to his man. 20 pass breakups in his career, including 11 this past season. Just 1 interception in his career, but really you're talking about a guy that I believe something like only given up like 15 receptions all season, something ridiculous like that. And the ball skills are evident. His ability to jam the receiver and reroute them, coming off the line. The transitions are exceptional, especially for a guy his size. Porter's going to be a first rounder. He and Phillips are definitely 2 of the first corners to hear their names called, along with Christian Gonzalez, Cam Smith, Kelly Ringo as well. But one guy for Penn State that will be playing in the game is Jair Brown. 5'11", 208. Cam Rising, the quarterback, a guy we haven't talked about yet, who's probably going to come back to Utah for another year. A guy who's mobile, just really a gamer, tough competitor, a guy that could see himself getting drafted, not overly flashy by any means, not a tremendous athlete, not a tremendous arm strength, but a guy who just gets the job done. When you're talking about Brown, the ball skills, right? 9 interceptions in his career, 9 pass breakups as well. A guy that can play behind the line of scrimmage a little bit, had 5.5 tackles for loss, 3 sacks this past season, back-to-back years with at least 60 tackles. This is the guy that's going to get the job done against both the run and the pass, so he'll be the guy for me that I'm really keeping an eye on there in that Penn State Nittany Lion uniform. So if we have to talk about a guy from Utah, Braden Daniels is the guy that I'm going to be looking at, that left tackle there for Utah. And with Braden Daniels, is he going to be a tackle? Probably not. I think he's going to have to kick inside to guard. He's only a junior, so he could also opt to come back for one more season. And really, when you're watching Braden Daniels, I think what's frustrating is the difference in the reps. Some reps you'll see explosiveness. Other times you will see a guy who is struggling. He'll use his hands to get guys like Brandon Dorlus or DJ Johnson at Oregon, or Tuli Tuipulotu. He'll use his hands and good feet to keep them in front, but he gets driven back, getting off balance way too often, and that's really the biggest frustration that I see with him. When he's able to stay balanced and when he's able to keep his hands inside the frame of the defensive end, he can be very effective. That's why I think ultimately you're going to see him kick inside to guard, but he's going to have to be able to drop that anchor and really, he's 6'4", 297. He's got to add some weight to that frame. Otherwise, he's going to get pushed around at the next level. I think you're going to see him probably bulk up to about 310 or so, 315 by the time we hit the combine. He's going to have to, for teams to really take him seriously there. A guy that I think could come back to Utah and really work on adding some weight. We could even see him do what Nick Broker did. Nick Broker knew at the next level he's going to be playing inside to guard, move from tackle to guard for Mississippi. Braden Daniels could end up doing the same thing for Kyle Whittingham and company. So those are the bowl games to look forward to. The remaining bowl games, obviously it'll culminate with the national championship, CFP national championship in SoFi Stadium, Inglewood, California on Monday, January 9th. A week after that, we'll be talking about all of the underclassmen who have declared, who's decided to come back. That's really where the my top 10 list will finally get adjusted. We'll know exactly what we're looking at there. We'll talk about the All-Star games. We'll take a look at the Senior Bowl. Obviously, we'll have to recap these bowl games as well, talk about them, and then we'll really get into that draft process. We'll be studying a lot of game film. We'll be talking about different players, talking about position by position. We'll get into my first mock draft and really get into things from there. I really don't like to do my mock draft until we know who actually is declaring for the draft, so my first mock draft won't actually be released until January, but we'll start breaking that down. And obviously we've got time, because we're talking about 4 months once we hit January, 4 months until the draft actually hits the end of April. So we've got a lot of time to spend together breaking down game film, breaking down the top players at each position, and really also finding the diamonds in the rough, the gems that we're going to be talking about there on day 3 of the draft as well. So hopefully you'll be here for the entire ride, enjoy things with me, and we'll just go ahead and talk college football, and we'll hit things fast and furious here coming up in the coming weeks. So until next time, for ReadyForTheDraft.com, this has been the Ready for the Draft podcast. I've been your host, Gregg Schutze. Take care, everyone. Hope you had a Merry Christmas. Have a Happy New Year, and we'll talk soon. Until next time, I am